Good morning, everyone, and welcome to Empty Cloud Monastery. My name is Sāmaṇera Nipako, and today we are going to be going over a short but pretty well-known sutta. It is the Samyutta Nikaya 11.22, which is about an anger-eating demon. So I'll start by paying homage to our original teacher, Shakyamuni Buddha, the reason why we're all here today, and then we'll get started. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Buddhang dhammang sanghang namasami. So, as said, we'll be going over Samyutta Nikaya 11.22. There should be a link to it in the description if you're interested in following along, and we will be going over Bhante Sujatu's translation. So, the sutta begins, near Savatthi in Jeta's Grove. Once upon a time, mendicants, there was a native spirit who was ugly and deformed. He sat on the throne of Sāka, Lord of Gods. But the gods of the 33 complained, grumbled, and objected. "O Lord, how incredible, how amazing. This ugly and deformed spirit is sitting on the throne of Sāka, the Lord of Gods. But the more the gods complained, the more attractive, good-looking, and lovely that spirit became." So I think for just a little bit of background, for those who may not know, is Saka is a well-known deva who comes up quite frequently throughout the suttas, and this sutta actually lives within the Saka Samyutta, which is a series of suttas that all involve Saka. So he is a pretty important figure that you'll see repeatedly throughout the suttas. And in particular, he is the head of the gods of 33, hence the um, title Lord of Gods that we see here. And I love how this sutta starts out. That this little native spirit, anger-eating demon, depending upon the translation you look at, sits on his throne, and just by complaining, just by giving attention to this little native spirit, all sorts of wonderful things start to happen to them. They become more beautiful, they become more handsome, they become more lovely, more attractive. You could think of this little guy as one of those people who think that any type of attention is good attention. So it doesn't matter if you are criticizing them, rightly or wrongly. It doesn't matter how you are talking about them, even thinking about them. All that matters is that there is attention being given to them. And I'm sure you've met people like this, and there is no shortage of them online. Something that actually came to mind to me the other day when I was trying to decide what to teach about today was how there's that age-old saying for online, don't feed the trolls. And that's essentially what the gods of the 33 are doing here. Instead of approaching the situation in a much more reasonable manner, they start to complain and just talk about this guy. And I'm sure we've all done this as well. Where has somebody inconvenienced you in a minor way? Like this little native spirit hasn't done anything other than sit on the throne. That's it. So minor inconvenience, something that's really not a huge deal, no actual harm has been caused, and yet we complain and we complain and we complain about the person or what's going on. I can think of many times in my life where I've done that. I have no shortage of options. So this is a easy to remember sutta to just fall back on. Like where has an anger eating demon showed up, and where have I started to unjustifiably begun to complain about it? Or even maybe some harm actually has been caused. Something more than just sitting on the throne has happened. How has the honey tip of anger allured me, and how I've decided to act out of it, even though it has this poison root that'll do nothing that cause me harm. It might even cause the other person benefit, like in this case here, where this little native spirit has become more attractive and good looking. So there's just a little paragraph, and there's all these dimensions you can fall back on for your own life. Where are you the gods of the 33? Where are you sometimes the anger eating demon? Are you sometimes the one that is seeking out attention and have decided that any attention is good, and you get a rush and you feel great that anybody is talking about you? So to continue with the sutta, so the gods went up to Saka and told him what had happened. Indra, Saka, replied, "Surely, good fellow, that must be the anger eating spirit." Then Saka went up to that spirit, arranged his robe over one shoulder, knelt with his right knee on the ground, raised his joined palms together toward the anger eating spirit, and pronounced his name 3 times. "Good fellow, I am Saka, Lord of Gods. Good fellow, I am Saka, the Lord of Gods." But the more Saka pronounced his name, the uglier and more deformed the spirit became, until eventually it vanished right there. So, what is being done here, the pronouncing of his name, is something that might seem a little bit odd to a modern audience, or at least a Western audience. I'm not sure about if this is still practiced in some other locations, but you'll see this throughout the suttas where somebody who's important, usually it's a king, a god, a Brahmin, um, somebody who has status, will pronounce their name to the Buddha usually. And this is a sign of respect, a sign of a reverence. So all Sokka did here was be respectful. He didn't do anything particularly crazy. He was just respectful to this demon. He was de-escalating. So rather than feeding into all this disarray that and complaining that the other gods had started just by the fact that this stinky, deformed, ugly looking native spirit showed up, he de-escalated. He didn't have to do that. He could have continued with the rest of his retinue and complained about this little guy. Um, read all sorts of suttas where the gods of the 33 are at war with like Vipasiti and the Titans. So they very easily could have done something like that. They could have continued to escalate this further and further. Who who knows if this little guy was becoming more handsome and beautiful just from people complaining verbally? How much more powerful would this being have become if they had done something they are often doing, waging war? And he chose not to. That's a really big deal if you think about it. In modern times and throughout history, people have waged wars for things that are extremely insignificant or silly. Hundreds or thousands of people have died because of anger. Um, In fact, a sutta that I thought would be good to tie in with this one, and on this note of de-escalation and war and anger and all the negative ways in which it can impact people, is Samyutta Nikaya 1.71, which is where a Buddha, or where a Deva asked the Buddha, "What is the one thing you would approve of killing?" And this is a very interesting question because our first precept is not killing. I take the precept of not killing. And the Buddha does approve of killing one thing, and you can probably guess what it is, or if you've been around long enough, I'm sure you've heard a monk talk about this. So, this sutta, Sāmaṇera 1.71, is as follows. At Savatthi, standing to one side, that deity addressed the Buddha in verse. When what is slain, do you sleep at ease? When what is slain, is there no sorrow? What's the one thing, Gautama, whose killing you approve? The Buddha replies, when anger's slain, you sleep at ease. When anger's slain, there is no sorrow. O deity, anger has a poisonous root and a honey tip. The noble ones praise its killing, for when it's slain, there's no sorrow. And you can immediately apply this to the sutta that we're talking about right now. In the second paragraph, it says the gods complained and grumbled and objected. That's a form of suffering. How awful does it feel to complain and complain and complain, to grumble about something, to ruminate, to strongly object? And how much more does that get fueled when things don't change in a way that you want? So in this case, this little native spirit gets more beautiful and handsome and wonderful, which I'm sure would lead to more complaining and grumbling and objecting from the gods. Again, where has this happened in your own life? Where have you complained, complained, complained? Maybe you've done something or not. Maybe you've been handling it skillfully or not. But either way, you keep complaining and grumbling. How much does that suck? How much does that hurt? How much suffering is involved? And it's so easy to keep feeding into. It just keeps going infinitely. So, with that in mind, for when it's slain, there is no sorrow. You can see that Sokka didn't have any sorrow. All he did was go into the hall, treat this native spirit respectfully, and he disappeared. He left. He didn't feed the troll, to use the earlier reference that I had. And while this sounds really simple, if it actually was, a lot more people would be able to follow this advice. That honey tip is so delicious to so many people that they completely forget about the poison root. By getting angry, by acting out, it is like taking poison and expecting the person that you're angry with to die or to get hurt. It doesn't work that way. If you slay somebody, if you kill somebody, if you use verbal daggers, it doesn't matter particularly how your anger is acted out upon. There is going to be suffering both for you and the other person. And the amount of escalation you have will almost certainly equal the amount of suffering that you have. And If you don't have it in this life, certainly in future lives. So before you ever act out on anger, this is important to consider. Is this really worth hurting myself? Is this really worth hurting others? Is this something I want to actually do if I will regret it later? And this is hard to do in the moment. You'll probably put your foot in your mouth many, many times and make many mistakes while doing this. But you can start to see the different physical symptoms in your body and in your mind. I'm getting angry. I have that bodily sensation. I'm having these types of thoughts again. And when you're observing this and all those times that you'll make mistakes, at some point you'll decide not to do it. At some point you will be like Sokka and decide to be respectful. And one thing you can think of as well is when you're questioning your anger, investigate it. Is there a legitimate reason to be angry or not? And if there is a legitimate reason that requires action, don't act out with a mindset of anger. You can think of anger as like a pool of boiling water. You can't see your reflection. You won't know what is good for yourself or for others or for both. So it is best to wait for your mind to lessen. If the retinue of Sokka had taken the time to do that, then perhaps this little native spirit wouldn't have been around for very long. I don't know which video it's in since it's been a very, very long time since I watched it. But Ajahn Brahm has a retelling of the story in a more fun way, where after his retinue comes and finds him, Sokka comes and he sits down with his little native spirit. He serves him some tea and cookies. He massages his feet. He tells him how nice and attractive he is. He asks how his day has been. And the way that he tells this story is just so sweet. This king of gods is spending his time being so kind and so gentle with this little annoying native spirit that he could just so easily theoretically smite. And he takes the time out of his day to be kind, to be gentle, to be nice. If a Lord of Gods, which is unfathomably powerful and pleasant, can take the time out of his day to do something like that, you can too. And most of the things, most of the people that we get annoyed at and about don't require the type of response that we have. How can we respond more skillfully? I keep saying this over and over again, hoping that it'll help sink in your mind. That when you have one of these moments pop up, you'll be able to reflect back on the story. Ah, I see an anger eating demon has appeared. I don't have to escalate. I don't necessarily have to respond. And if I do, how can I do so skillfully? How can I de escalate? So, finishing up this sutta, then Saka, Lord of Gods, guiding the gods of the 33, spoke this verse. My mind isn't easily upset. I'm not easily drawn into the maelstrom. I don't get angry for long. Anger doesn't last in me. When I do get angry, I don't speak harshly, nor do I advertise my own virtues. I carefully restrain myself out of regard for my own welfare. And this is such a beautiful way to end the sutta. And it's a really reasonable goal. Sometimes people think, oh, stream entry and any of the other stages of awakening, far beyond me. I can't get there. Not happening in this life. I'm going to practice anyway, but it ain't happening. Here, Sokka is talking about it being, even though I don't know if he's a stream enterer at this point, he does become one in the suttas, they can still become angry. And regardless of his state of awakening at this point, I don't get angry for long. Anger doesn't last long in me. My mind isn't easily upset. This is such a reasonable goal. If you're somebody that has a lot of anger, it'll be hard, it'll be difficult. And it's still so reasonable. I am somebody that is prone to aversion. I was never an explosive, angry type. My family tends to be that way, and from a very young age, I decided I didn't want to be that way. It caused me a lot of emotional pain, so I didn't want to be like that. But I was still a very internally angry person. I was very good at holding grudges. I was related to that, very good at not forgetting the way in which somebody had treated me poorly by body or speech, or even sometimes body language if I interpreted it that way. I was very good at acting in a maliciously um, compliant type of way. So doing what was asked, but if I didn't like it in a way that was not so kind, I was easily upset, easily drawn into the maelstrom. In my younger days, I spent a lot of time on the internet and I left many angry comments and had a lot of silly online discourse with people that really weren't interested in discussion. I was speaking harshly. I would talk about my own good things whenever people would criticize me rightly or wrongly for the ways in which I was aversive. And I didn't think I was an angry person, which is a very common trend in my family as well. I'm not angry, dot, 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 even though they're very clearly angry. So sometimes we can even be blind to it. And it took me a very long time. And it wasn't until I acknowledged that, yes, I am I am actually a very internally angry person. I am in so much pain, and I don't have to do this anymore. I am going to work on this. It took me years, and I'm still prone to it, but anger doesn't last long in me anymore. It does show up, but it's not very often. And when it does, it's not there very long. Even if it's really, really, really strong, which these days it'll happen like once or twice a year. It doesn't last long, maybe a couple of hours, which feels like a really long time these days. But in the past, I would be angry for days or weeks, sometimes months. So a couple hours, no big deal. If I can do it, you can do it too. And I've seen this improvement with my family as well. Um, if I knew somebody was getting angry, if I de-escalated it, then things were fine. It was good for my welfare and for theirs. No verbal daggers needed to be exchanged. And a way I would work with this, both in terms of reeling in my online discourse aversion and with my family, is do I want to be right or do I want to be compassionate or kind? I can be right, and that is it. Nothing else. Can be right and unkind. I can be right and conceited. I can be right and insert unwholesome state here. And more, I decided I don't care about being right in this moment. It really doesn't matter. Most of the time, it didn't. And even in some of the times that it did, it wasn't the right time to talk about it. Wait for things to calm down and address it later. Pick your battles. And I started this with myself as well. Once I started to get a hang on the outside, I had a lot of internalized aversion pointed towards myself. So I was able to use that same sort of strategy. How am I escalating with this with myself? How is that negative side of me, that angry side of me, becoming more attractive, good looking, and lovely? How am I beating down the good portions of me and uplifting these negative portions of me? And it was incredible how, by just changing my internal dialogue, slowly, that angry, aversive, unhappy part of myself, still there, but it's very rare to show up. Very rare. And I couldn't believe it. There would be so many times where I was practicing this where like it's not working, this is taking too long, it's not working. I was complaining, grumbling, and objecting. But I kept at it anyway. And then one day it occurred to me, I'm a lot less miserable. I'm a lot less angry. I think I can actually spend some time with myself. I I think maybe I can actually like this being, which was so incredible. And it transformed my relationships both internally and externally. And again, this took me years and it was really dedicated work. I had ups and downs, of course, during this. I had some really big downs, actually, but I learned a lot from them. The internal signs and symptoms, internally and externally, this is happening. I use them as a learning experience. I can't control how I'm feeling, but I can control how I respond to it. I do not have to act unskillfully. I do not have to feed this anger and aversion. So, this little sutta is packed to the gills with so much stuff that you can apply to your practice anytime you have aversion show up. And aversion doesn't necessarily just have to be only anger. This can also be forms of sadness, or in my case, it was a lot of depression as well. However, aversion manifests in you. First, get to see it. Then, once you can see it, you can get to understand it. And once you understand it, it will begin to lose its power and not be so scary. And at some point, it can disappear just like this anger eating spirit. So, this set of verses, I'm going to repeat one more time and then I'll see if there's any questions. And it is so worth remembering. My mind isn't easily upset. I'm not easily drawn into the maelstrom. I don't get angry for long. Anger doesn't last in me. When I do get angry, I don't speak harshly, nor do I advertise my own virtues. I carefully restrain myself out of regard for my welfare. And the verses from the other sutta, I'm going to repeat as well, as they're also worth mentioning. Again, this was Samyutta Nikaya 1.71. When what is slain, do you sleep at ease? When what is slain, is there no sorrow? What's the one thing, Gautama, whose killing you approve? The Buddha. When anger's slain, you sleep at ease. When anger's slain, there is no sorrow. O deity, anger has a poisonous root and a honey tip. The noble ones praise its killing, for when it's slain, there is no sorrow. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. Okay, so I'll go and see what kind of questions there are. Hello, Rebecca. Hello, Manal. Hello, Jayanta. Hello, Gregory. Hello, Usha. Um, hello to somebody with what appears to be a Thai name, but it might actually be a different script. Hello to Mangu and hello to Rebecca. And Rebecca has a good question. So Rebecca asks, what if you can't change the situation immediately? An unhealthy situation that may take time to leave and pushes the anger buttons. So I have a great example for this actually. So some of you that knew me as a layperson may have already heard this story before, but I don't think I've talked about it online before. So um, for quite some time, I had a living situation that wasn't too positive. I had somebody who I had been friends with for a very long time, but they started to target me. And despite the fact that I was doing a lot to try to help them and in ways that they wanted me to, it got to the point where they started to make some very serious accusations against me, even starting to say that I was doing things like gaslighting them, which is a pretty serious accusation. And if you don't know what that is, you can just look it up. It's become a buzzword these days, unfortunately, where people have started to use it inappropriately. So this was a situation where I was very, very tied in with this person because we shared the same friend group. And um, all these different ways in which they were treating me was really difficult and really hurtful. And what I would keep doing in this situation is because I had known this person for so long and I had the context of what was going on. And I kept that in mind. So, around when this had happened, this person was working through some difficult health diagnoses that they had received. And along this as well, a good friend of theirs who, well, they weren't friends anymore, but they had been an important part of this person's life for a long time, had recently died. Work was not going well for this person. And they have this whole entire background of things since I'd known them for so long that I knew were influencing this situation as well. So it was like this chaotic, awful soup that was going on for them. And I just happened to be the easiest target, and I lived with them. So that made it even easier. And what made this especially difficult is aside from the verbal things and not really helping out much around the apartment, there it was really hard to pinpoint what was going on. It was very subtle in a lot of ways, but really it was not a good situation. And I thought I could stop being friends with this person. I can't afford to break this lease. I have the money to do so. And there's all sorts of other things I could have chosen to do as well. But I decided, you know what? I'm hoping I'll be a monk someday, and here I am. My dog is getting old. This lease is only going to be going on for a couple more months. Maybe I can find a way to move out and still pay my portion. So I spent a lot of time, and I'm talking a couple months, trying to figure out what to do here because I didn't want to end up destroying the friend group over this. I hate when that type of stuff happens. And I had also seen this person do that with other friend groups. So that she had, I had been this person's longest term friend, and I didn't want to do that. The amount of drama related to it was just awful. So I decided I would stick through it. I spent so much time thinking about all the really nice things she had done for me, about all the really good things she had done for other people. Now, I've listed a couple negative things here about this person, of course, since you're asking about a difficult situation. But this person also has a really beautiful heart. She is the type of person where if she really cares about you, if she really likes you, she will literally take her shirt off of her back and give it to you. She's a wonderful gift giver. She's very kind. She's very thoughtful. She is incredibly generous. She is very caring, deeply feeling, and when she's great, she's great. She really is an outstanding person in so many ways. So I would fall back on that, especially in the times where she wasn't so great. I would think of all the nice things she had done for me. When I was in high school and for my early years of college, I was not well off financially, and I didn't have a car. So if we wanted to hang out, she would pick me up and drive around. Never once did she ask me to contribute to gas because she knew I couldn't afford it. There were so many times in the same time period where, again, I couldn't afford things. So she would buy me lunch, or she would buy me dinner, or we'd go out to the movies together, or whatever it may be. Not once did she ever ask me to pay for any of that. So even though things weren't great now, I don't have to reflect on only that. And I also didn't want to act out of anger. I did decide at some point I need to leave. This is not working out. If I want this friendship to stay alive, I need to move. And I I couldn't actually really think of a good way to think about it. But I think that maybe a David decided to help me out. So in this situation, what ended up being the conclusion is my roof started to leak directly above where I was staying. I had given up my room to this friend of mine, so I was living in like this kind of like living room area that we just partitioned off, and the roof is leaking through one of the vents that they didn't install properly when they redid the roof during my stay there, and they took forever to fix it. So I used that as an excuse to move out, and I would have thought of something eventually. So to follow up with that as well, when the lease was starting to come up, I didn't want to sign off on it again. So I basically said what I said in the beginning. I want to become a monk. My dog is already 6. She's a Great Dane. She could die next year. She could die tomorrow. And she ended up dying a couple months later, actually. So I said, I don't want to be tied in to a lease when I might have the opportunity to become a monk next year. And that's what happened. And I've already been paying my portion of the lease, and I haven't even been living there for 6 months, and I don't think it makes sense for me to keep doing this. So, even though it was difficult, it was really, really hard because of that particular situation. I knew I was angry. I knew I was hurt. Most of the time, if I'm angry, I'm hurt. That is something I always fall back on. What am I hurt about? And it's often tied into self-making as well, or expectations. What expectations weren't met? What am I taking personally? What isn't aligning with how I view myself? How are the worldly winds blowing me? And these were all sorts of things that I was thinking about as this went on. How can I approach this delicate situation well? And it wasn't easy. It was probably one of the hardest things I ever did, but I learned a lot from it. This isn't going to work for everybody, of course. If you're in a sort of difficult situation where you're very unsafe or very unwell, if you don't think you can handle it in a way like I did here, sometimes you just need to leave. It's not always the time to be a bodhisattva. Like if you're in a abusive relationship, it's dangerous, it's difficult, but get out of there, and if possible, as early as you can, and do so in a safe way. Because you know, in situations like this, the I think it's the first week is where you're most likely to be murdered or assaulted by your abuser because you left. So when you do things like this, do it safely, but find a way to get out of there. You don't have to subject yourself to these sort of painful situations. And you can always look on what you can do in less severe situations. Like, okay, I can't control the person who's doing this. I can't control the person who's doing that. But what do I have control over here? So, in the little example that I gave with my roommate, I had control over my perceptions towards them to some extent. I had control over how I spoke to them. I had control over how much time I spent with them. I had control over the ways in which I decided to speak to them. I had control over seeing when they were not in a good spot. So, understanding this isn't personal. This isn't actually about me. So, what's going on here? How can I respond? So, look for where you do have control. Don't focus on where you don't have control. And if nothing else, there is a sutta in the Anguttara Nikaya, the Book of the Fives, but I don't remember the number right now, where Sariputta goes over 5 ways of dealing with resentment. And I always really like the last 2 in particular. So let's say there is very little that is good about some person you're thinking about or you're living with or whatever the situation may be. Imagine you are parched in the desert and you're very thirsty. Your water bottle has run out of water. You still have a long way to go, and you will take any water you find whatsoever. As you're walking along, you look down and you see a cow's hoof print with just a little bit of water. You know if you stir up the mud, you won't be able to drink it. But right now it's clear and looks clean enough. So you get down on all fours and you put your mouth with the water and you drink it carefully. This is like thinking about whatever good things there might be in a person. Even if there's a lot of really, really bad, awful things, you can almost always find something skillful. And the last one, if you can't think of anything skillful about them whatsoever, if you have confidence in karma, then you should feel compassion for them because they have to live with themselves every day. So if you think they're insufferable, imagine how they feel about themselves, even if it's not something they're conscious about, and the type of consequences that they are going to have for their actions that affect themselves and others negatively. So, if nothing else, you can always fall back on that. Um, so, very good question. Um, Hopefully, my example was at least a little bit helpful. And then Rebecca follows up with the precepts, I'm able to restrain speech most times, but the inner speech is tough. And this is definitely relatable. I feel like the inner speech takes a lot longer than the outer speech. In the example I gave, there was a lot of internal complaining and a lot of external complaining as well. So the way that I would try to deal with that is if I saw myself spiraling and going with the unwholesome inner speech, I would just start to do what I had an example of the cow's hoof print or think of all the other nice things she's done for me. And also look at why I had this going. What's feeling attacked? What selfing do I have going on? and so forth. So just really trying to understand. If you understand, it's less scary. And if you understand, you'll have more tools in your toolbox for the next time it shows up. So hello to Omad and hello to Chintana. Chintana doesn't have a question, but he says he moved in with his daughter. I'm glad it sounds like it's going well. And that is the last comment I see online. Well, I'm glad it was helpful, Rebecca. So I think I'll end here now. So thank you all for joining me today. I hope that you all come away loving this pair of suttas actually as much as I do. It's very relatable, and because anger is something that arises in people quite regularly, from very subtle forms to very coarse forms. This is something you can practice whenever it shows up. Don't even have to meditate, because people sometimes say they don't have time for that, but you always have time for wholesome, skillful speech by body, mouth, and mind. So I hope these verses and my example will be helpful for you in any difficult situations that may arise for you. May there be as few as possible. So may you all have access to the Dhamma, always have access to the Dhamma. May you have affinity to practice the Dhamma and good conditions to practice the Dhamma. May you always be reborn where the Dhamma is available, and may you soon realize the threefold bliss. So until next time, friends, have a wonderful rest of your day.